All right, we are live with episode 10 of Mindful Endeavors. Welcome back. And just as always, a disclaimer, just to make sure that we know we're not trying to lead people in the wrong direction. This is just purely to have a conversation around mental health and other aspects associated with that topic, and then even bringing the outdoors into the conversation. We're not mental health professionals, but if there is something to be pulled out of this, is that make sure we encourage you that if you need help, if you feel like you need help, please go out and seek it. And the second most important thing is to keep the conversations going, and that's what we're trying to do here. All right, so joining us back again, we have JCJ Street, Josh Jacobs, the guy that helped orchestrate this podcast. Huge influencer to that. Welcome back, man.
Hey, thanks, Al, for having me. It's always it's good to have a chance to come here and talk about, just talk pretty much. So thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird thing because now, since we live 1,400 miles away, this is kind of like going to be the one place where we kind of talk the most amount of time, or whenever we do lives on the Instagram, that's where we talk the most. But because
these are a lot of fun. Yeah, these are a lot of fun. So I know we talk on the phone every now and then, but we get some FaceTime and just get a little bit more serious, I guess. Not just catching up, but trying to solve the world's problems one step at a time.
Yeah, we're trying to solve one problem out of like the plethora of problems around the world.
At least we're trying to do something.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. Like I just want to make sure that we talk about stuff that really matters, and especially the nuance of it, because that's what always gets lost, especially since we no longer really know how to converse, and we don't know how to engage in proper dialogue anymore. One of the things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes is the fact that we get so aggressive because we're a lot of times certain viewpoints that are meant to be like beliefs and stuff like that have become so entrenched into our identity. So whenever we see an opposing opinion, we kind of get not necessarily like offended, but we sometimes I feel like it's like people take it as a personal attack to their identity, which is why we get so aggressive to things like that. So, and it goes the same with mental health. So yeah, so we not too long ago I did watch the Social Dilemma, which is what we're going to talk about, and that was very interesting because part of what that documentary was talking about was pretty obvious, but then you have like the way the machine works. Like that was like the one thing that kind of blew my mind. Like I don't know how you took it when you first saw it. Like, can you explain?
Yeah. So my first impression, there's things that I agreed with. There's things that I didn't agree with. So for some of the viewers, I'm a digital marketer. So I've been working in the field ever since I graduated college. So very familiar with the tools that not only in social media, but just marketing tools, tactics. One of the main core, classes that you need to take is psychology. So as a marketer, I understand human psychology, what motivates people to take certain actions. And I guess when I watched this Social Dilemma, the biggest thing about it was, how do these social media platforms first create growth, and also how can they monetize it once they get to a certain point? So there's also another show that kind of really touches on that, and it's supposed to be a comedy, but it's called Silicon Valley. And really what a lot of these startup businesses, what they need to do is get a lot of users first to see that there is a lot of people that want to use this app. So users is a big factor to going to investors and saying, hey, look at all these users that we have, active users every day. Do you want to invest with us? So that's how they get their seed money, with several series of as far as fundraising. But then when it goes into the monetization stage, was really they have the startup. So it's kind of like, once the company starts up, they get some cash flow, then they need to start to have a business use case, and they can't just be free forever. So obviously they're going to sell your personal information to to marketers like myself and to have access to those users. So that's when they can monetize. So it really brings up, I guess, it's been evolving for several years now. And at this time, we're really seeing the repercussions that we have from having all of this technology and also having users that are so active and just having, I wouldn't say, we can say gross invasiveness into a person's private life, but then comes the question, how are average people allowed to be stewards of this data and this information and use it not only wisely, but also securely in that environment?
Yeah. So one thing that immediately jumped out at me was that a lot of people don't really realize that for example, like the big ones like Instagram and YouTube, like some of the big ones at least, they didn't start off, under Facebook or under Google. They were basically independent, right? And the way they were built, like the more I watched that episode, because I kind of watched it in parts, but the more I watched it, the more I realized, like, hey, like, when these two platforms first started, like they weren't they weren't built with the intention of being monetized, right? So when you have like these big tech companies now buying these platforms and they're realizing like, well, we need to find a way to monetize it, and that's where you kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the actual documentary, where you see them, how the algorithm plays and how like they're trying to feed you to a certain degree conflict, because they know, like, and to some degree I think it's scientifically and possibly statistically proven that conflict basically sells, right? I mean, you see that all the time in media, movies, games, everything. So that's kind of why I feel like that's where it evolved to, because, the need of monetization, because like you said, things can't be free forever, right? So a lot of social media kind of like, now when you look at the algorithms now, like they, like whatever you, like it's down to a science where whatever you react to the most, that's when you're gonna get pushed on your feed. So
yeah, and you touched on a good point. Is when you said that these platforms were not built to be monetized, I would say, in my opinion, I don't think they were. When they were created, it may have been just for fun. Let's say Instagram, for a case in point. The developers may have created it just for a spot where people could post their photos, catch up with friends and family, and then as it grew, it became a monetizable social media app. Now, I think that they do have monetization in mind when they're building them, because they can't have a photo sharing app without monetization, because it's so costly to either run the servers, have people that are actually developing the app and all that stuff. People aren't going to jump on board and really, create something that's better unless they have a monetary incentive. So I would say, maybe at like very, very early stages, but once they started getting users and seeing how popular it was, that's when the gears started turning. Like, hey, we can monetize this. So I want to say that, yeah, some people, they create things that are, try to have a positive impact in the world, but ultimately you have operating costs, you have people that are coming on board to make it better, and that monetary incentive kind of gets in the way. Now, where they've gotten to now is it's way out of hand, because it's allowed for digital media companies to come in, especially news companies, to come in, and that's when their viewership was going down. When you had newspapers and all that stuff, nobody was reading newspapers anymore. They weren't going online for their information. Now it was to a time where information was finding people. So when you woke up in the morning, you would check your phone and you'd be like, oh, okay, like this is information that is quote unquote legit, right? But then we got into a business model where these digital media companies started popping up. You have Vice, you have Vox, you have all these like very, very micro niche sites that were popping up, and they were actually starting to generate news that was either stretching the truth, flat out false, or some form of the truth. So that's where everything started to really fall apart, because they were pushing their content, and especially the political or even just like religious type, anything that causes conflict.
Right.
You're going to have someone that's on one side that's going to share it because they're going to be like, hey, I agree with this. And then you have somebody that completely disagrees. It's like, hey, look at this idiot. So then that's what really drove the algorithms. It was the usability and shares, all that stuff. So it was just a snowball effect after that.
Right. I mean, and like the reason, so well, yeah, I guess I could kind of retract a little bit of what I said about the purpose of why these some of these things were built, because when you look at like Vine, you look at other things that were basically sold to other companies. Um, it could have been that the main incentive was to build something that was popular and then sell it, right? You see that all the time in like businesses that do that. Like they build a small business that is either like meant to like just throw a monkey wrench at the current status quo of the industry so that people can feel threatened, and then they sell it, and whoever buys it destroys it, and the people that built it, they're like, all right, well, I already made my money, so that was the whole point, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, there's definitely, I mean, monetary incentives to like some of the stuff that was built, in the early stages, but like in terms of how it's monetized now, I think that's what the intended purpose wasn't that, like like the whole thing with like just how like you look at like something like TikTok, for example, like when you look at like TikTok for like, you know, that was meant to really just kind of like I mean, you have like the whole controversy of like, like the sharing your data and all that stuff, right? But, um, like people ask like, I mean, because even me, like I'm kind of more of an outsider looking in terms of social media because you work with it a lot more than I do. Uh, it's like, how do you monetize it? Like, it doesn't make sense, but you know exactly how that operation is taking place, and the same thing with like the social dilemma, which kind of like that part was like new to me. Like, okay, this makes sense. And like you said, I think it definitely started going down in terms of the quality of life as these platforms progressed. When you factor in like the play that now you have news organizations kind of coming in, and at the end of the day, I mean the news organizations, whichever, and again, we're not talking political here, but regardless of what news organization you're a part of, their purpose is not necessarily to tell the truth. The purpose is to make money like any other business. Like, and that's just what they are. They are another business. So, and if you kind of catch on to the trends that, hey, these type of conflicts, whether true or not, because I mean, if you look at how like sometimes the media works, they mess around with how they layer the truth, so that basically the whole thing doesn't get labeled as a lie. Whereas like you have one word that is truthful but not factually incorrect or something like that. Like that's what I think that's what when you talk to some of the people that work in media, like they'll say like, oh yeah, it's technically truthful but not factually incorrect, or I mean, I might be getting advice confused, but something along those lines, right?
I know.
So
Yeah, yeah, and you just layer the truth, and you sprinkle in, a few things that are in there that may be truthful, and then the other stuff could be flat out false. But then you go to, I don't know, Snopes or whatever fact checking site that you want to go to. But it's you're just going to go to the fact checker that's going to confirm your biases, right? And then I think the biggest thing, I guess, another way that these digital media companies kind of form these. Well, I guess they didn't form these bubbles, but just these echo chambers where social media, they're only going to push stuff that you're actually interested in. But the only problem with that is that if you engage with content that, let's say, it's not just like tech world or marketing world or anything like that. I'm not getting a healthy dose of stuff that's going to challenge my thinking, I guess you could say. So if I'm looking at something and it's a marketing principle that I believe in, I'm going to see more stuff like that. Now, if I don't interact with other stuff, I'm going to see less of that. So I'm not getting the whole picture and story. I'm only seeing this narrow view of a particular area of, where I'm actually actually executing in. But when we talk about politics, we talk about religion, we talk about anything else, these are the same things that we fall into. This echo chamber is a bunch of people that are just confirming each other's biases. They'll say something, they repeat it, and then eventually it becomes the truth. It doesn't matter which side of the spectrum you are, if you're religious, non-religious, anything like that. You're going to confirm your biases because you're only going to be listening to people that actually say like, hey, yeah, I think like you do. And then you're just in this hole where you think everybody else is the enemy. And the adversarial type of thing that's manifested from these sites is where it kind of gets out of hand, because the only way that these people speak to each other is usually with an article or something that somebody says. Then there's a whole thread of people attacking each other, and it's not healthy at all, and it's counterproductive.
No, definitely not. And like when you I'll add another thing to that. And like when you look at like the mental health decline, as you know, more the social media apps and everything, well, social media in general has like became more, you know, rooted into our everyday life. You look at the trend from, you know, when that started being stronger and stronger and stronger versus the correlation of mental health. You see the decline as social media starts getting like, you know, more prevalent in our life, then you see the mental decline going down. And when you look at marketing, I think at a certain year, I want to say the 70s, I should check really quick before I've gone on this, but at one point, you look at the marketing switched to kind of versus targeting adults and, you know, kind of young adults and stuff, like target children, or not necessarily children, like children's probably, but, you know, target a younger audience, because if you target them early, that means they have longer to keep buying your product, right? So when you look at the social media apps, who, like when they first, like you look at TikTok, when TikTok first started, it was a bunch of, you know, teen boppers lip syncing most of the time, right? Like I think that's how I saw the marketing, the little advertisement for it, and I just saw, you know, somebody reciting like lyrics from a TV show or just music, right? But you look at like a lot of the social media apps, like they tend to be hits amongst, you know, younger audiences.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the marketing thing, like where it's like, you know, they're trying to market to a younger audience, and like to a certain degree, it's fine. But the unintended consequences of that is just like when you look at who the mental health, who it's affecting in terms of mental health the most. You know, you look at like the statistics. You look at it's always teenagers, and then to make it even more upsetting, it's mostly around women of like 14 to 17 years old that are affected the most. But now you're factoring in the fact that the news media's got into these social outlets, which are, again, kind of, they're basically kept alive by the younger audience. You're throwing a bunch of conflict at them, and it's just like, it's a conflict overload, right? So yeah, then, you know, you at the same time you're selling fear, and that makes it easy for an echo chamber to be created, because, you know, if you have a bunch of people fearing the same thing, you're going to want people to be thinking the same way, because, you know, survival, like, you know, this is a common enemy, or, you know, whether it be a boogeyman effect or a real threat or whatever, you know, common enemy, then you want people to think, oh, well, I want them to recognize that as the enemy. Otherwise, I'm going to be in danger. So that's kind of like, you know, you get all that like panic and everything, which again, just deteriorates mental health. And then you get the echo chambers created, and then it just keeps on getting worse and worse. And the cycle of fear gets perpetuated. And it's just stuff like that. Even for the smallest things, just like fashion, like you see how many people like get into arguments over fashion. And it's like, that's like one of the most meaningless things out there. Like, wear whatever you want to wear. The whole purpose of wearing clothes is to keep you like from being naked out in the woods and, you know, cold and stuff, you know?
Yeah. And it's the strangest thing is, especially on Twitter, I mean, I see it on TikTok. I see wars against, you know, iPhone versus Android, men versus women. I mean, it's everywhere. It's just people that are arguing with each other, thinking that the other side is just the devil. And we can't really have this discussion without kind of getting into politics, right? Where we saw a very sharp, very sharp contrast from 2018, 2019 into 2020, where there was an election year, and we just saw just the vilification of the other when it came to politics. And it was just flat out, people were you know, calling people out, saying, you know, discussing things like, hey, I'm gonna you know, kill somebody from the other side, and getting away with it and all that stuff. It was just it was very gross, and it was people that were fighting against their neighbors, their family, and this is all because of just differing views and values. Now, that just didn't really make sense to me, because we're all influenced by what we were seeing, and you know, just other people's values were the enemy. And there was just this threat that the other side, and these are fellow Americans, this is not a foreign country or anything like that. These were people in our own country that live right across from you or next to you or in your same family. And we made it to where it was so adversarial that people were being disowned. People didn't want to talk to each other anymore. Friendships were ruined. I mean, even relationships. It was absolutely disgusting. And the fact that it was exacerbated by social media, the news as well, and the media, they just perpetuated it. And as human beings, I mean, it was a perfect experiment that I kind of looked at it, and I actually had a podcast with a friend of mine before the pandemic and everything like that. And I came to the conclusion, but I don't think that human beings are inherently good. Now, it doesn't mean that they're bad either. It's just we're amoral. So when stuff hits the fan, we're going to justify whatever it is. Our circle gets smaller. We're going to take care of, our family and friends. If that fails, I'm going to take care of my family. If that fails, I'm going to take care of myself. So, this was all just a perfect experiment with that. And that's what I found, just looking at this movie and then also just seeing it live in person.
Yeah, because I was very surprised that they even got around to actually saying the two words that I don't know if that's going to necessarily ruffle some feathers, but I'm just going to say them, Civil War, like that they talked about that. Like I was not surprised I was surprised more that they were able to bring it up. Not so much that that was their conclusion. Because like you said, like even family members, like I talk to people, at work, at the gym, random social settings, that they always say like, well, and you even see the memes too, like, like where you see like the memes are like, oh, like my husband, I told my husband not to, I mean, obviously I'm botching it, but I'm just paraphrasing it. Yeah. I told my husband not to talk about politics around the dinner table. And then you see 2 drinks later, and then it's like, you see like, some kind of like exacerbation of that. Right. Like, and you see those memes, right? Like that. I mean, I talked to a bunch of people and like, yeah, like it's to a point where you have family members being torn apart, even in the immediate family, not so much like in the extended family. Like that's scary, really, because if you can break away ties like that, like for family, imagine like you're looking at your neighbor who you barely have an interaction with. Like, you're going to look at them the most foul way possible. And yeah, I mean, it's again, like, I guess I should just clarify to you, the listeners and the people watching this on YouTube, that we're not necessarily bringing up politics for the sake of making a political statement or anything. It's just we're talking about chronological events and events that are actually influencing, the deterioration of mental health, which this is one of them. Like, and it's very not often talked about in the mainstream because you're all like we were talking about a few minutes earlier, the echo chamber. You're not going to really hear these ideas and these conversations where it's like, well, if we keep going like this, like it's mentally unhealthy to look at your neighbor and be like, think that he's the enemy without even knowing them, like it's not unhealthy, especially because we, in some shape or form, to some degree or, or another, we are social beings, like, and we do socialize. And I honestly think that to some degree, we were able to kind of like survive in nature because of the social dynamic of the human. And to your point about, amorality, like, I mean, you can look at history, and history will kind of give you some examples of that. I mean, we, just look at what societal norms were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and they're not the same as what they are now, right? So that's to your point, right? So, yeah, I agree with that. And just the fact that, like this, again, going back to social media and younger audience, like now you look at like how political high school is, how political even middle school is. Like high school, not too far away from where I went to, actually had a political debate about a political topic. And, that you can imagine that caused some chaos because people that were debating, now you identify them as, oh, the other side. Mm-hmm. So, you can imagine what comes up after that. So, and again, just because of the negative consequences of the social media that we are using today, which, again, I mean, building an e-commerce site, making money off social media, I mean, that is fine. Like, if you need to enrich yourself and being, in a better position to like, survive, and that's what I mean by like making money, right? Like, the more money you make, the more comfortable you tend to be. Granted, if you manage it correctly, because, it's not, a universal rule, but that's all fine and good, but we just kind of have to kind of like really look at okay, well, what can we use social media for? How can like to what degrees are we gonna like involve ourselves in social media? And I think that's kind of like where you kind of come in, because I mean I look at you and I look what you're doing in social media, and you talked about the stuff that's not shown yet on your social media pages, but we've talked about that stuff, and I find that all very productive. And I think going something along that route, I think it's a healthy way of using social media. And you can go ahead and kind of like not necessarily give out your business plan, but talk about that.
Yeah, I'll expand on that a little bit. So, social media, it creates an opportunity for especially small businesses. They were early adopters of social media, having access to the marketing tools at Facebook, Instagram, all the platforms that utilizes social media. But they were able to build their businesses off the backs of the data that was being mined by Facebook. So, if you haven't seen The Social Dilemma, it really breaks it down as so you have a social media platform that has a user, which is pretty much you're the product using social media. It will mine as much data as it can about your habits, your likes, your dislikes, all that stuff, and it'll offer that profile to a marketer. Now, it's more indirect. Like I go onto the platform and I say, hey, I want access to all the people that are entrepreneurs and want to build a business and want to become, successful in either a creative capacity or sell their services. So they're just like, okay, we have this many users that have entrepreneurial tendencies. They read entrepreneurial magazines and stuff like that. They're interested in marketing, all that stuff. I think they'll be perfect. So I pay a certain amount of money for that access to those customers. Now, my ads will show up onto their feeds, and then they'll see my face and all that stuff and get more familiar with me. So for a business owner, I mean, that's one of the tools that you can build your business on. Is like, okay, I need to reach more people, more customers, have them come to my website.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, on the other hand, we consume content in massive quantity. There's some people that spend a lot of time on social media just consuming content, and it can be detrimental to someone's health if they are consuming the wrong things. And I equate it to this: we live in an information age, and now it's become more of an age of curation, or I guess of filtration, I guess you could say. So there is different types of content, and also the quality of content. So you have certain content creators that are able to put out massive amounts of content, but they might not be the best content for you to consume. So this may be for someone that has body dysmorphia issues, and then they're consuming content that they see, perfect bodies, quote unquote, perfect bodies, manipulated bodies as well,
Right.
plastic surgery and all that stuff. I mean, that's very detrimental to them. Now,
Right.
as a social media platform, they're going to feed you that stuff, and they may or more or less don't know if that's detrimental to your mental health. They just know that you like to consume it, so they're going to keep feeding it to you. And it's like that little dopamine high that you get from either acknowledgement or just interacting with that type of stuff. It's a vicious cycle, and it's a tough habit to break out of.
Yeah, I can speak for personal experience. Like I didn't because that is one side of things of like how detrimental it can be if you fall in for the trap. But from my experience, like when I first started up my Instagram page, like once I discovered the outdoors and everything, and I was just like, okay, I could use this as a way to kind of like, just kind of like mentally decompress. And then I figured, okay, now the message that I want to project is, the emphasis on why we need to be mentally healthy, because it does contribute to just overall health. And that's when I started building my social media page and all that stuff. And one thing that I did fall victim to was that where you're talking about that dopamine high, the instant gratification, where I would like go to sleep, and maybe if I would post like at 9 p.m. or something, somewhere later, go to sleep an hour later, wake up at like 6 a.m., 7 a.m. And the first thing I did was check my phone, check, social media to see like, hey, how did my page grow? Did I get that many likes on that post and all that stuff? And it was like that for quite a little bit of some time. And I luckily was able to snap out of me like, you know what, like I'm literally feeling the stress of like seeing like, okay, maybe this post didn't get any likes. Damn it, now I have to go, do some better content or something for the next post. And it definitely took away from my enjoyment of actually just going out to fish, going out to hike, shooting my bow, stuff like that. Like, and I literally saw that and I was just like, okay, this is definitely just hurting me. Like, and to a certain degree, like my job like was also suffering for a little bit because I was just like, okay, so now I got to make sure I strategize this and then got to do, prep for this, prep for that. It didn't really pay a little bit of, I lost a little bit of focus in, work and with my family and everything. I may sound like I'm exaggerating, but it basically happened because like, like instead of like calling my family members to see how they're doing, I'm spending time on social media. And a week later, 2 weeks later, like, oh, you haven't called us. Are you okay? Like, you normally call us like every 2 days and it's been like 2 weeks. It's like, oh, okay. So I lost track of all that. And yeah, that's like another trap that you can easily fall into just because you talk about like that instant gratification, the dopamine high, which basically is the same thing when you look at like how they both affect the human body in the sense of like, your mind is your body, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, there's a definite link between your mind and your body. If one suffers, the other is going to follow. So, going back to what you're saying about being a content creator on, especially Instagram, I think that's why so many people are floating to TikTok because first, I think the reach is a lot more organic. Instagram has become such a changing landscape, and for someone that's just putting in the effort for their content and not really trying to play the game of Instagram, which really takes a lot of strategy and all that stuff. I mean, you have companies that actually have social media managers that have a full-time position, and they're there to not manipulate the game, but really just play it. And for content creators, like that's not what you got in it for. It's not to get as many likes as you can. It's more of, hey, I want to share my experiences. And yes, I would like the satisfaction of people actually acknowledging it and liking the content. But I mean, ultimately, what people, I think on Instagram, yes, the likes are really cool and all that stuff, but I think more of the interaction, the comments that people have and say like, hey, I really like that point, or, I liked what you did here, or, how'd you do that and all that stuff. That's the more of the connection part, the more human interaction that, really drew people into Instagram at first. And it's just become that. And, I played the game for a little bit, and yeah, it just became such a hustle that I was just like, you know what, I don't want to play that anymore. I'll just throw ad dollars to, expand my reach and all that stuff. But, Instagram's really started to extract, all of the, I guess, the monetary value from their content creators rather than, rewarding content creators that built the platform, right? So,
yeah. Because even like what you said, like you are the product, right? So if you don't invest in your product, what happens, right? Like you can't compete.
Mm-hmm. So it's crazy. So I just didn't want to play that anymore. But yeah, I mean, content creators, all they want to do, they just want to be appreciated for the stuff that they put out there and do it for the love of actually creating. And getting paid for it's also nice, but we're not there for the likes. It's really there for what kind of impact can I have, and do I enjoy doing this? Can I be rewarded for it? I think those are the three pillars that really hold a creator into it.
Yeah, because again, I lost sight of that, recently, and I was just like, so basically the very message that I'm trying to spread out about, mentally fortifying yourself and everything is being, diluted by me falling for this trap. Like, and it may like be like, yeah, I mean, it's because I'm like you said, like I'm kind of playing the game of social media, and like when you're looking at like specifically like Instagram or something. But yeah, like the message that I was trying to convey to people, the reason why I started all this, I forgot. And You can't really be a positive person if you're constantly being stressed out and focusing only on that stressor, which, in my case was getting the amount of reach, getting the amount of likes, getting the amount of people to respond to the things. Like, this podcast is still relatively new, and it's like I kind of already saw myself trying to compare myself to like, bigger podcasts, which was like, it was kind of dumb on my part, because it's just like, you know what? There's still a lot for me to learn. The whole point is to get the message out there. And, if I lose sight of that, then I really don't have a message at that point. And, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, definitely needed to be reminded of that, and maybe smacked around a couple times by reality, which was, humbling, of course. But, I'm always down to eat a big old slice of humble pie. Never been afraid of it, just even though I resist a little bit, but never been afraid of that. So, yeah, and that's kind of the thing. Like, there are productive ways to like use social media, like especially now, like nowadays when you have e-commerce specifically relying on that heavily. I mean, there's ways to get to it, and I think over time, with like stuff that's happening in current events, we might see a decentralization of that, so it's even easier to actually get your content out there and be, like you said, a content creator first, and then a monetizer second, right? Because right now it's like the game is to be the opposite, right? And it's just people are resistant to it.
Yeah, and I would compare it. I think one analogy is like when I go to the gym. There's a lot of people there. There's people that are just getting started. There's people that are mediocre. There's others that have obviously been putting in work for years, right? But I've never felt uncomfortable in the gym. It's more of, hey, that's what I want to aspire to. That's where I want to get as far as a visual look, or I want to be as strong as that person or whatever. So I think that's like a healthy dose of just like a little bit of competition, I guess you could say. Especially if you have friends around you, your closest circle kind of pushes you, at least for men in this way. You have that healthy competition where you're just like, okay, one of my friends, he's doing this, that, and the other thing. All right, I need to step up a little bit. But when it comes to social media, I think there's such a, like, it's not even just your friends you're trying to compare you to. It's complete strangers, and obviously Instagram is just, it's chock full of just fake. And I mean, you can just call fake news like wherever it is. You have doctored photos, you have rented vehicles, you have homes that aren't, like, people don't even own, and all that stuff. And then there's just this comparison game where you're just like, oh man, like, look at all this stuff that person has. Their life is beautiful, and just like all this stuff. And that's where Instagram has become. It's just a lens where it's just not reality, but we still, even though it's in the back of our mind, we know that it still affects us to a certain degree. So that's where you have to be aware. At what point am I starting to get discouraged, or where am I getting disillusioned from where I'm trying to go? So either that's like, you limit the time that you have, unfollowing people as well, getting an emotional reaction when you see something. Those are the steps that you can take in order to mitigate that. But also it's just like, all right, you have to take a full inventory of where your life is, and then how are you going to change it, right? So if there's something you don't like about yourself, your body, your career, your housing situation, you just have to plan it out. It's like, all right, how am I going to take the steps in order to, because that instant gratification and that comparison is going to destroy you and keep you from actually stepping out your door and changing it.
Right. Nothing worth having comes easy. I mean, so
of course, yeah.
It's been around for a while as far as I can remember, right? So it couldn't be any more truer, like, honestly. And I had a buddy too.
Even then, I guess that's the classic case. Like, nothing worth having is easy, but for some reason, and I'm a marketer, it's just like, 15 minutes a day, 3 times a week, you'll look buff like this guy, or you'll have a booty like this girl. Like, I don't understand it, but psychology just tricks us to where it's like, oh, I can do it. Oh, okay. I take this pill and I'll get skinny. Great. Oh, I take this this class and I'll be a millionaire. Oh, okay, that's easy. So we still get tricked into that, and I think that's just human psychology, anyways. But we
Yeah.
know that as a fact, but we don't practice it.
Yeah, like we know it, but and it's just not in the back of our minds, that so we don't necessarily like live it or walk the talk, basically. And like you just reminded me, because I follow this PhD like athlete, and he studies nutritional science and everything, and like he legit PhD, and he put out like a like kind of like a meme where he was just like, where he's like, real scientific experts will say things like, in my opinion, from this study we can conclude, from the study, you know, we can observe, versus the scammers will tell you, you will definitely do this, it's been proven, this is the science, or this is the truth, stuff like that. Kind of like the marketing kind of like little tip, the what is it, not trade words though, what's, I forgot, I can't remember what the just
Buzzwords.
the buzzwords, there you go, that's what I was looking
Yeah.
at, the marketing buzzwords. And you know, like you said, we fall into that. So and yeah, and then that kind of, to what I mentioned earlier, like when it comes to like younger girls that are having the issue of like their mental decline, a lot of that comes to that, like, because you know, I've talked about this, I think several times, if not at least once, um, where I talked to another guest, and we said it's okay to look at like people that have done it, that have succeeded, as inspiration. But the death trap that you fall into when you look at that is if you're trying to exactly play out the same roadmap that they did, that they went through, and expect the exact same results. There's another saying that I think is, what is it? First in, best dressed, or something like that. Like, which basically means that, you know, if you like, and again, it's a metaphor. Like, you have a party and you put in a lot of effort into your outfit. You if you're the first one there, a lot of people tend, like, when they, as they're first coming into the party, they'll see it more because it stands out more because there's less people. Once you have 100 guests, you know, 1,000 guests or whatever, you know, eventually you're not going to stand out anymore. It kind of goes with the same thing of like, well, you have, like, for example, a David Goggins, you know, yeah, you see, you know, you see what he does on social media. Like, he's the first one because he's the first David Goggins. And if you see so many people, I mean, you might have another David Goggins, maybe one or two, three, but then eventually, like, you're not going to be a David Goggins, but you're just going to be another person at the party, you know, like, you know,
But,
so like,
yeah, I'm sorry.
you were
Go
saying,
ahead. No, finish your point. I'm sorry.
no, like, so the important thing that I always like try to like emphasize, like, yeah, draw the inspiration, look at these profiles, but like, draw the inspiration. Don't, I mean, you can emulate. There's a difference between emulate and replicating. Like, you know, you emulate, there is some kind of like differences that you can incorporate that are specific to you, but it's always better not to be the next someone, but be the first person of this.
Yeah, it's a strange thing because growing up playing basketball, when I was a kid, you know, one of my idols was Reggie Miller. Like, you know, awesome shooter, played basketball for the Indiana Pacers, and you know, this dude just like shot the lights out. And
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of things that he did that were very similar to his game, but then again, you know, there's stuff that, you know, I took from other people as well, and kind of just, you know, added my own style to it. So, but it was so much different because it's a strange thing when you see someone, especially if they're older. There's more of a disconnect where it's like, oh, that's where I want to aspire to. But yeah, for some reason, it's like you see someone like a David Goggins, you know, you just look at it and just like, all right, I don't have to be exactly who he is. I don't need to have his life. I want to have maybe his impact or his work ethic.
Yeah.
But you know, Michael Jordan, just looking at his game and all that stuff, it's like I want to work it just as hard as him, but I don't want to be Michael Jordan. But there's
Exactly.
something strange with the psychology of comparing to others on social media, where it's like, oh, I want to be them. I want to have their life. I want to do this, that, and the other thing that they're doing. And it's a strange. I mean, we're still evolving and we're trying to process all of this stuff. We've never had this much information. It's so accessible, and
Mm-hmm.
our brains just can't handle it. Our attention spans are shrinking. We have no way of processing this in a healthy way. So, I mean, there's a healthy dose that you can have every day, but you just have to realize, like, what is toxic information? What is making you feel bad? What is emotionally not getting you primed for your day in order to go out and have the best day that you can have possible? So, one thing that I've incorporated in my routine is when I get up, I do not touch my phone until I start about an hour before work. So I get up about 2 hours before work. I do everything not to. So I'll listen to an audiobook, I'll read, I'll meditate if I have to, which it's not really meditating, but just like a time of reflection, and getting getting a healthy meal, taking a cold shower, all that stuff. I do all of that before I go into my phone and read something that is emotionally going to get me wrapped up into the day, whether that is a work email, whether it's a text message, whether that is a new social media post. That's where I draw the line, where I'm just like, no, this is not the time. This is how I'm going to prime myself for this day. So social media will take you astray, and all the other notifications that you have. So I've been very judicious on, hey, what is important that I'll get notifications on. So that means I'll only get direct messages from, Instagram, Facebook, and all that stuff. If somebody's talking directly to me, I'll think that's important to get a notification from. But I'll take, like, anyone that follows me, turn off those notifications. Anyone that likes my stuff, turn off those notifications, because that's just trying to get me back into the cycle of the scroll, the endless scroll. So I just told myself, I'm done with it. I'm not going to do that. People want to communicate with me. That's great. That's what I'm using it for. I'm not doing the whole dopamine hit and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good thing to extrapolate from this conversation. The fact, like the example, or like, what your steps are like in your morning routine. I think that's a good example. I mean, the fact that you put away your phone up until 2 hours from when you actually wake up. I think that's great. I mean, honestly, I think it was a story. I remember you posted that as a story on Instagram, or to do those things. And that's when it kind of started, like, it slowly started like waking me up in terms of like, hey, you're spending too much time on your phone in the morning or all that stuff. And yeah, so I think it's definitely, good call on your part. And I think it's something that maybe we can all do, those that are a little bit stuck on the social media heavy stuff. But yeah, like the fact that what you just said, like, you look at like a basketball player like Reggie Miller, which again, like you said, dude, phenomenal shot for sure. I still remember those days. And you incorporate some facets of his game into you, but then that doesn't necessarily mean it stops there. You can evolve it to make it fit either your style or even improve it. Like, it's like, you look at, like, for example, another basketball example, because, I know you love basketball, so do I. Michael Jordan and Kobe, like, you look at those two athletes, a lot of people like see the clips where they're the carbon copies of each other, but then you don't see the different things that they did, and the different styles that they had. They had a very similar work ethic. If you look at, them two, like, they're very, we're going to work hard or you just get the hell out of my way. Mm-hmm. And, but there's definitely similarities, but a lot of people don't talk about the differences because it's just like, oh, we have the next Jordan. It's like, there's nothing bad about saying like, hey, well, I don't want to be the next Jordan. I want to be the next me or the first me, whatever. There's not disrespect on Jordan. It's just, you want to have your own identity. You want to have your own impact, like, or an impact that's more basically you, like, that describes you. And, I think we can definitely do that, especially when we look at the, like, celebrities and everything, like how glamorous their life is and everything. It's like, well, I mean, if that's the route that you want to take in terms of like being an actor and all that stuff, then okay, go ahead and try to do that. But like, it's just funny that we mentioned these things and we're talking about these things because I had a buddy of mine that's from Canada and he asked me one question that I still think about to this day. And he was just telling me like, hey, so I kind of look at you Americans and I look at you guys like, same age as me, 26, and I see a bunch of people already on boats and, mansions and, with big cars and stuff like that. I'm like, how do you guys afford all that? And I'm like, first of all, don't get caught up on all that.
Credit.
Second, yeah. And there's such a thing as credit. There's such a thing as renting, and or sometimes people just inherited it from their families, and it's not necessarily something that they personally work for, but their parents did, which is also fine. Yeah. I'm trying. I'm not trying to like bash like people that are in that situation, because again, there's nothing wrong with like your family, giving you stuff. I mean, that's why they're your parents. Like they're trying to make sure that you don't suffer. Like for example, me, grew up poor. If I have kids, I'm gonna do my best just because like I don't want them to suffer with the same stuff that I did. So I want to make sure that they're in a better position. So that's just really quick to kind of make it stress the fact that I didn't necessarily mean as a knock, but there's different things that may not play out. They're not everyday situations, especially when you look at like when you're talking about how fake things are. Like you can rent a car. I can rent a Lamborghini right now and drive it around uptown Dallas and look really fly and make videos and be like, look at me. And I can only post things like that.
And people have built businesses doing that as well. And,
exactly.
That's where people get drawn in. And yeah, it's just it's all fake. It's a fugazi, and then then they are able to get the cash flow in order to live that life. But yeah, it's a fugazi up to a certain point, and it's not. I think my biggest thing is that people that are actually wealthy do not flex. Not at all. I don't see people that are rich that flex. There's some people that are cocky and all that stuff, but they don't flex to people that are poor in their eyes. Usually they're just, okay, I'm going to flex to my friends that are also rich and all that stuff. And, there's just a lot of insecurity in that way. But, yeah, I just, the real wealthy people, they don't flaunt their money. They don't flex it. Plus, they know that that's a liability because, somebody's just like, oh, I tripped, and, try to sue them. So, when in the world that we live in. So, yeah. And I guess another point to bring up is, when was the last time you had, as far as really good life-changing information, just slap you in the face when you check your phone in the morning? Like something that changed your life as far as information that was going to move you forward in your life. When was the last time you picked up your phone and that happened?
Well, maybe not so much information, but I've gotten texts from family members that have kind of impacted, but that's not the same thing.
Yeah. So I'm saying social media, you open it up and it's like, oh my God, this is the key. This is the key that's going to make me move forward in my life.
I'm being completely facetious when I say this, but not too long ago, when I opened up and I saw the notification that, McDonald's had the Pokemon cards, and I was like, let's go get them. Let's go get them. Again, a little facetious, but I mean, it's not to what you're asking, right? But it did like kind of like change my focus a little bit, and I was like, I want that freaking shiny Pikachu, man. I want that shiny Pikachu, and I can honestly say, I got that sucker. Here it is.
There you go. Okay. All right. You completely ruined my point, but I'm glad you got that card, though.
No, well, I mean, it's something I get what you're saying, because realistically, like, it's not something that, for example, because what I did with the Pokemon cards technically is not necessarily productive. It's not necessarily destructive, but it's not productive. And I get what you're saying, because that's the point, right? Like, when are you going to open up your phone and see something that's going to change your life for the better?
But also, something where it is valuable, like super valuable information that gives you an epiphany or anything like that. Usually stuff that's on social media or even on your news feed on your phone, very low value, irrelevant information that your brain does not need to consume. That's what I call just like, it's junk food content. I see it everywhere. It's constant, and free information. And we've gotten used to this diet of just absolute junk food content, which it's free information. We think that good information is free, and that's not the case. You have to look very, very hard for good information, or to compile it. I mean, just remember the essays that we had to write in college. Like, we had to, agonize over, okay, what information can I compile in order to make my point here? It's the same thing with good information. Either you have to pay for it, or you have to agonize on where you actually get your content. And that's just the biggest difference, because if you're just on a junk food mind diet, that's exactly what you're going to get.
Yeah, and to answer your question, like no, I've never really gone something like to what you're describing, like never. And like you said, I mean, because I'll even add the fact that like you see a bunch of people that are like, oh, I'm going to show you how to do this for free, but it's really like there's some kind of a catch to it because, like you said, like if like for I mean I understand it completely. Like if I worked my ass off to develop a blueprint on what made me rich, I may not necessarily give that information for free unless it's like friends that I see struggling and things like that, like family members. But I mean, again, that's different. I mean, that's just the network you build. But like, just give it out for free just to random people. I may not necessarily give it out. Depending on what it is. I'm trying to do my best to. I mean, this is different. Like this whole thing about mental health. Like, I really think that that's it's a different issue because it's related to health. It's not related to necessarily like a business or something like that, right? Like, or something that's life changing. It'll get you motivated. Like, I share different things that are motivation for people to actually just kind of try to like, hey, I saw this and it inspired me to at least try. But at the same time, like even then, even if I wanted to give out information, I know for a fact that it's not a one size fits all solution. There's different things that come into play. Like what is working for you on the social media may not necessarily work for me 100% because I mean my drive, my focus might be different because of the different industries that we're in. And even then, like I've seen people even just growing up from similar backgrounds, and one gets out of the situation, the other one stays in it, but not necessarily a bad situation, but it's just because one person was content with what they had, which was not a whole lot. The other person wanted more.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely distinguishing factors. I mean, even if you have like two people that grew up in the same situation, like for like my example too, like I've had a couple friends that we grew up in the same similar situation, maybe some a little bit less than me or some a little bit more than me, but one of them ended up dead. The other one is just doing his own thing and just working, just kind of like not. And I'm not going to call it a dead end job because if it gives you gratification, because if you're working like a minimum wage job, but you're able to do something else that interests you, then that's not. I wouldn't call that a dead end job if you're happy with it. But like, there's people that kind of you know, like work at something basic, and I'm just I'm not gonna knock it. I mean, I'm not saying this is a knock it. I mean to knock something, but just like for example, like you look at maybe like an employee at McDonald's and they're working there for a while, but they're complaining that there might not necessarily be anything better, but you haven't at least attempted to search. Like that's kind of like where I see like the differentiating factor. Like if you try, it's going to be different. Like you may not necessarily find the answer that you want, but you might still find a better answer.
Yeah, and there's a huge difference between stagnation and just settling for the bare minimum, and then striving for something a little bit more. And everyone has their different needs, and that's the beauty. And we can kind of round this off with what's beautiful about social media is that
Right.
you can find a community that has similar interests that may not go with the status quo of what is portrayed in the media. So like American values, where it's like, hey, work hard, play hard, get the money, get the corporate job, all that stuff. But if you like in the heart of hearts are just like, no, I want to live out in the country with my family, my huge family, where we're just raising farm animals, and I'm in nature, and that fulfills me. You're gonna find people that actually have that mindset, and you guys help each other, and you guys can communicate and share those values, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to fit in the same niche that everybody else does. And I think that's what's beautiful about social media. You can communicate with so many people in an instant, and then also share ideas and lifestyles together.
Yeah. It's definitely a good closing topic to kind of go with because like you look at like the prime example, like when we grew up, I don't know if you got this, but I definitely got this from people, not necessarily my parents, but from people that are saying like, you're never gonna get anywhere playing video games. You're never gonna get anywhere playing video games. And now with Twitch and a bunch of stuff, like you don't necessarily even have to be a competitive gamer, which the competitive gamers, when they win that prize pot, dude, you're talking about for like a game of Dota, which is, I think, I don't know how many. I mean, there's multiple users on the team, right? But like that team can take home $17 million in the
Yeah.
prize money. Like, $17 million, dude. And granted, people may say that, oh, well, that's just a unique situation or extreme example. Like, okay, fine. There's competitive leagues now. Like here in Dallas, we have I forgot what the team is called, but there's a professional, Major League Gaming team for Dallas. Like there's a team. You know, there's that. Then you have Twitch, and you can just basically stream game and do all kinds of funny stuff while you're gaming and make it your own experience, and you share that with people, and you can make money off of it. So it's like you're like, that's the beauty of like social media, that you're like what you're saying, like you're finding a community, and you're able to either at least interact with the community, which I've done throughout my mission, which is to basically spread the word of the conversation, keep the conversations going of mental health. And through the outdoors community, I was able to meet a bunch of people in the fishing world, and I especially me, that I'm still relatively new, they help me out with like, hey, well, for this type of bait, when I throw this, I use this kind of setup and so and so, and I'm taking as much advice as possibly I can possibly absorb. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are like you said, really beautiful of social media. The fact that, I mean, depending on where you are in the country, like in the United States, you can basically set up a business and just kind of start something, And I mean, it may not necessarily take off in 1 year, it may not take off in 2 or 3, but by year 4, it might take off, or you might even learn something of what to do or what not to do for the next, business that you set up if one setup fails, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of goes with hand in hand with mental health, because if you understand that failure is not really meant to be feared, but rather embraced, in the sense that when you embrace it, you're like, all right, well, what events or what actions did I take to lead me to this failure, and what can I do for the next business venture where I no longer, like, I don't necessarily make the same mistakes or I take the same actions, but now I'm in a better position. Oh, did I fail the second time? All right, well, let's try again and do something else different, like that's, where it comes with it. Like if you're afraid to fail, like that fear, and if you're afraid to fail, like, you're not necessarily going to be able to attempt anything. So you won't really know what your limitations are. Like at that point, you just place limitations on yourself, and you're not necessarily like reaching your full potential, which you don't even know yet because you're paralyzed by fear. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is too, like financial health. I mean, we're probably not going to be able to get into heavily on that. I might have to have you back for that, but financial health does play in, like it's all connected: emotional health, mental health, financial health, nutrition, medical health, like all that stuff, like all plays around to how it affects mental health and your overall well-being. Like one thing, I mean, I would even argue that the mental health is actually contributed by all the other factors that I listed. Like just the fact that, if you, like if you're basically, can't figure out like where your next meal is going to come from, like that's definitely something that can be upsetting and things like that. But if you're financially stable, if you can financially stabilize yourself, and again, I want to make sure that I emphasize this, it's not a one size fits all type of thing, but if you can do your best to just be financially sound, you'll definitely be in a better place mentally as well.
Yeah, and that's where Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as far as you start off with shelter, food, and then you move on up with things that are, I guess, more superficial, not as concrete. So like you start with food, physical stuff, and then you have emotional needs as far as love, acceptance, community, and then you move on up to all the way up to self-actualization, just the stuff that you do, feeling fulfilled, having the stuff that you want, reaching your goals, things like that. So that all is wrapped up into it. Yeah, they're different levels.
Yeah. All right, so we're a little bit over than the hour, so we're about 4 minutes over, but we had a good discussion. Just one final thought or final thoughts before we kind of break off from this episode.
Yeah, I guess my final thought is just going back around is, I think it's very important to take a full inventory on the information and content that you consume, and that's exactly correlated to, very similar to junk food. And if you're eating chips and French fries constantly, and all that stuff, you're just not getting the stuff that your mind needs in order to fully function and also be in the right headspace. So find what that, I guess, the headspace where it's either meditation or time to write, creative outlet, things like that. Those are things that you need to find in order to fulfill yourself and get you primed and ready for the day. Reading, listening to ebooks, things like that. So those are my final thoughts.
Yeah, my final thought is basically, again, based off the Social Dilemma. I hope it's definitely something I recommend people to watch on Netflix. But going based off that, which is where the discussion kind of started, I know at times it's a lot easier to dismiss your neighbor, hate your neighbor without even getting. It's a lot easier to do that than to actually get to know them, understand where they're coming from, and such like that. But I think us, again, as social beings, social animals, we definitely should strive better to we don't necessarily have to be best friends with our neighbor, but we have to just, kind of be polite to each other, get along with each other. One thing I will say from my experience here in Texas during the snowstorms that we had, a lot of people expressed their willingness to help each other. So I think we definitely need more of that for sure to go around. Not necessarily to use as a crutch, but it's just nice to be able to understand that if you're by yourself or if your family is struggling, that there's at least somebody that is willing to help. But more importantly, it's just, I think we can definitely, with more human interaction, we can definitely learn to basically understand each other and, at least respect each other to a sense. We're here on this planet, we all have our own demons to face and everything. And, it just helps to be having at least knowing that you're going to be able to say hi to someone, they're going to say hi back,
Yeah.
So
we all need a little connection.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And yeah, most importantly, let's not let social media divide us. Really, if that is, I mean, I'm not saying that's the main goal, but the content, and we should definitely, like you said, be careful how we digest all that stuff. And if in moderation, even junk food in moderation is not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily a good thing, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. So, everything in moderation.
Yep. I agree.
So, all right, bud. So thanks again for hopping back on. I'm always happy to have you on here. We were definitely going to have to, do this again soon. And so for those that are still watching, still listening, you can find Josh at JCJ Street. And that's basically all your handle and everything, right?
Correct. Yes.
All right.
Yeah.
So you're
find
watching
me Street, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, if you're into that sort of thing. Yeah, so that's where you'll find me. And my content is more geared towards, at least now, just content creation, entrepreneurship, starting your own business, either through service-based businesses or product-based businesses. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's something that you're also helping me out on. So yeah, I for those that are still listening and watching, I definitely recommend checking out his page. There's good stuff there for sure. Checking out all his, social media profiles and everything. So awesome stuff.
All right. Thanks, Al. Appreciate it. Always a good time.
No, thank you, man. Thank you for volunteering your time. It's a huge investment. And again, we're just trying to keep the conversation going around all possible aspects that we can find around for that affect mental health. So thanks again, man. And yeah, so I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, man.
All right, later.